This video is my response to this article I recently read by Igor Derish, in which he interviewed Dr. Brandy Lee. I'm discussing it because it exemplifies what we've been talking about in my free online domestic violence psychoeducation group on Saturdays. It's also important to relate what we see in intimate relationships to what's happening in society at large. From the writer, and I quote, "A Yale psychiatrist has warned that pro-Trump lockdown protesters who exhibit similar psychology as child soldiers could quickly turn into armed troops in the streets if the president loses his re-election bid." Dr. Brandy X. Lee, a forensic psychiatrist at the Yale School of Medicine, who largely teaches at Yale Law School, said the armed protests were a natural evolution of the loyalty President Trump demands from his supporters, end quote. Dr. Lee went on, and I quote, "When Donald Trump suggests that the virus be taken as a hoax, that people gather in churches, or that people protest for their own sacrifice, he's actually testing people's loyalty to the laws of his mind over the laws of nature, or even impulse for survival. The more he abuses them, the greater their devotion grows, since the psychological cost of admitting their mistake is even higher. And so it becomes easier to dig a well of unreality than to see the obvious truth," unquote.
I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
We see something similar in domestic violence cases. The more abusive a perpetrator treats his victim, the more likely the victim is to remain dedicated to the relationship. Often, after a domestic violence arrest, the victim will ask for the charges to be dropped. Victims' advocates have worked hard to educate district attorneys and judges. Now, district attorneys often charge defendants without the victim's cooperation. We're talking about the profound psychological effect of emotional and physical abuse on a victim or victims. Brandy Lee goes on to say, and I quote, "Having no core but wishing to avoid accountability, he, the president, tries to cover all grounds, but the psychological effect on the public will eventually be the most harmful. Not the devastating pandemic, the economic hardship, or even the incompetence itself, but how he hypnotized and misled the public to cover up his ineptitude. To lose our collective mind because an untreated, disturbed person in an influential position has infected a third of the population with his distorted worldview, all to buttress his fragile sense of self, will be a great trauma for the nation to emerge from. His supporters will be the most severely traumatized if they are able to wake up at all." Mental health symptoms can be contagious. During last week's group, we watched a portion of the movie Gaslight. Paula's mental health was adversely affected by Anton's mental health and treatment of her. The longer she remained around him, the more severe her symptoms became. Brandy Lee discusses it here, and I quote, "But what I find most insidious is the contagion of symptoms. Prolonged exposure to the president alone causes you to catch his worldview, and even the healthiest, soundest people turn crazy, as if afflicted with the same condition as the president. It is interchangeably called shared psychosis or induced delusional disorder. The cure is removal. Then, quite dramatically, an entire afflicted family, street gang, or prison cell block that seemed almost possessed returns to normal," end quote. Abuse needs to be identified and addressed as quickly as possible, both in intimate relationships and in society. Domestic violence is important because if we can reduce or prevent abuse in intimate relationships, it may help us prevent or reduce it in society. Mental health professionals have a responsibility to educate the public about abuse wherever and whenever possible. Thank you for watching.